how do we deal with the kind of climate change we have and all. So in all these, if I had to put in why nitrogen question today's in the discussion, fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, particularly nitrogenous fertilizers, becomes very, very important in agriculture, because today 82% of fertilizer used is urea, the nitrogenous fertilizer, and nearly 64% of the subsidies spent on fertilizers, which is nearly about 2.5 lakh crores, is again on urea, nitrogenous fertilizers. And while all other fertilizers are subsidized at a much lower rate, the urea is subsidized by nearly 77%. So if it costs around 240 rupees for farmers, government pays nearly 1,500 to or more than that as a subsidy. So that's the situation. So the investment on nitrogen is huge. Not only that, the global warming potential of nitrous oxide emissions is very high. And the nitrous oxide is one of the breakdown compound of nitrogenous fertilizer when it is used. Use efficiency of fertilizer is going down. We are going to hear more from Dr. Raghuram about the use efficiency and how we can improvise that one. And nitrous oxide potential, nitrous oxide itself, if we take, its global warming potential is nearly 310 times the carbon dioxide. And 69% of the nitrous oxide emissions is from fertilizers alone. So it becomes very, very critical for us to understand this. And as a urea is highly subsidized compared to other fertilizers, the use of urea is also increasing significantly. And that is leading to imbalance of fertilizers. So 4:2:1 is ideal NPK ratio. But today we have in states like Punjab, 30:8:1. So that's a situation which we have. And when we talk about alternatives always are dismissed, saying they are not possible, it's not working kind of thing. Whether it is about organic natural farming, or whether we talk about neem-coated urea, or now government is talking about nano urea. To replace one, are we coming up with whether we are coming up with new solutions which are better, or are we again talking about magic solutions which comes as again a magic, and then without doing much research are we getting into it? So these are the questions in front of all of us. So in that context, we thought we can't have anybody else to explain this other than Dr. Raghuram. So I welcome you, Dr. Raghuram, for this session. And we want to hear from you, and then we have a lot of questions to ask you as well. Over to you, Dr. Raghuram.
Thank you very much, Ramu, and for the nice introduction and setting the tone for the and defining the scope of the topic and the aspects for discussion. Yes, not many people in this country would have the courage that you had to leave a government job, the central service, and come down to the roots and get into the farm with the farmers and make a difference on the ground. So kudos to you on that. And unfortunately, even among the people who are on the scientific side of things, there are both kinds of people who struggle to make a difference. There's no point talking about people who don't want to make a difference or only make a difference to themselves. That there is no need to talk about that. But even for those who want to make, it's a difficult choice. Can you make a difference as a scientist within the establishment of science in which you work? Or do you necessarily have to do it to make a difference? These are dilemmas that all of us go through. And I'll just try and tell you what we have been able to do within the same system that we keep criticizing all the time. And it just requires some grit and perseverance, and sometimes willingness to ignore the usual parameters of success in your peer groups to do what you want to do, or to do what you think you ought to do. But there's also a difference between what is ought to be done and what is popular thing to be done. So in the process of being popular and living life on the terms of others, sometimes you may lose out on doing things that you know you ought to do, but you don't do. Anyway, so those are general points. But Certainly, it's a great honor and a privilege to for us in the science community to get to talk to people in the civil society. We don't usually get these opportunities. Uh, it must be said that we also don't actively seek out these opportunities ourselves. So there's always something more important to do, which keeps dragging you back to the same routine. And yes, to break out of this routine and interact with you people in the civil society is a very exciting thing for me. I've been waiting for this. Every time I've interacted in the few times that I did, I always learned something new, and it also in many ways redefined our own approach to the science we do. When we get the feedback from the ground, it also realizes certain areas of disconnect between what we do in the lab or what we do in our own science and what are the real situations faced by the people on the ground. Without this, so I will, to cut the long story short, I'll try to share the screen and for the benefit of people who are more used to, understanding things in terms of facts, figures, and numbers. Are you able to see this screen all right?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is this now full screen?
Yes. No, not yet.
Not yet.
Now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. So, as the topic mentioned was the nitrogen question, actually, the nitrogen question is a set of many questions. At least the bare minimum set of questions is what, why, and how of sustainable nitrogen management. Some of you might be aware that India has spearheaded for the first time United Nations resolution on sustainable nitrogen management, which has been passed in the 4th UN Environment Assembly in 2019. Since then, sustainable nitrogen management is not only a topic for the scientists or for the civil society, it is now actually a topic for the governments to act upon, both at the domestic level and also to discuss and promote it at the intergovernmental global level. And India has been at the helm, partly because of our advocacy and our involvement and constant push that this is something. If we have learnt our lessons from carbon and climate change connection and their connection to the sustainable development goals, then we cannot ignore the nitrogen connection. So our proactive approach to nitrogen actually comes from our learning of the lessons from the carbon experience. When the Western world was, calling the shots, and we were sometimes running for cover, sometimes denying, sometimes discovering, differing, diffusing, but essentially doing very little. But as the world has moved from Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals, most of you should know, especially in the civil society, that doing nothing is no longer a sovereign option. Being an independent country, you could say till a decade ago that we are a free country, we will do what we want to do, you are nobody to tell us what we should do. Even if it is in the name of the Millennium Development Goals. That option you had only still 20 years ago. Once the Millennium Development Goals have moved into Sustainable Development Goals, the sovereign option of doing nothing has vanished. So now every country that has agreed to address the Sustainable Development Goals has to do some non-zero action on it. They may determine their own action, but they have to commit what they have determined, like what we call nationally determined commitments. And they also have to deliver on whatever commitment they make before the international bodies. So India has made, for example, a commitment that we will do net zero carbon by 2070. Whether 2070 is a useful thing to commit or just a joke is a different discussion. But you could not have come back from COP26 without committing anything at all. You had to commit something. Once committed, you will have to show that you are working towards that goal. So this is an important aspect of the diplomatic transition from MDG to SDG. And with that in the background, we address the question of where does nitrogen figure in these discussions and how does that impact what we do, whether in agriculture or whether in energy or transport or a whole lot of other things where nitrogen is involved. And sometimes it is also fashionable to pit one sector against the other. Energy sector will say, no, fertilizers and, farmers are the main culprits. Farmers will say, no, Adani, Ambani are the main culprits. Or, some transport sector is the main culprit. Or aviation is the main culprit. The fact is, there is a problem in all sectors. The fact is, the solutions will never be complete unless it is addressed in each of the sector in their part of the job. So this is the reason why we have an interministerial national nitrogen committee. First, to drive home the point to every ministry that blaming other ministries is not going to help. You have to do your bit. What happens among us in different sectors also happens in the government between different ministries. Everybody is trying to reduce their job and put it on somebody else. But now, at least in the case of nitrogen, we have shown that it's no longer an option, and they have to do things, and they have to also sit together to discuss the problem, identify their part of the action, and distribute the tasks and deliver on those tasks. So we are now in working out the modalities on that part. I'll come to that in a short while from now. I hope everyone is comfortable with English, or if you want Hindi or maybe a bit of Telugu in between, you can please put a message or let me know. So sometimes technical issues are a little more complex for me to the terms in Hindi and Telugu, I may not be aware, but at least the rest of the explanation I can give if it is required. So how do we, because this is more about sustainable agriculture and Ramu has been spending decades on it, and that's the context in which he called me. How do we understand sustainable agriculture and the role of nitrogen in sustainable agriculture in the 21st century? Green and white revolutions may have done an excellent job in the decades when they were initiated, but their role in self-reliance, their role in food security, their role in protein, malnutrition is incomplete. It is a work in progress. It is also becoming unsustainable, which we may not have known or realized or understood the gravity at that point. But now we certainly know that the business as usual, whether in green revolution or white revolution, is no longer sustainable. In fact, green and white revolution going in opposite directions, where the crop farmers no longer keep cattle, or cattle farmers, especially around the big cities where they supply milk products, they don't have land to even grow grass. They have to buy grass, whereas the crop farmer has to buy manure. So this kind of segregation of green and white revolutions, which used to be a combined affair, agriculture as a whole, whether livestock or crop production, that itself is a major impact on the sustainability of agriculture over 10,000 years. Now we actually need a third revolution called Grey Revolution to connect back and restore the lost links between green and white revolution, because the waste of the crops is often the input for the livestock, and the waste of the livestock is often an input for the crops. So, but that collection of the waste, preservation of the waste, transport of the waste, processing of it, making it available to the other set, that linkages are all broken. So we need, one of the important things we need to do in sustainable agriculture is to bring back those lost linkages. Today's farmer may or may not want to do all of them together, but maybe a different set of people will be there to connect between these two. So you need a third pole to complete the triangle of green, white, and grey revolutions. We will come back to this theme as we go along. And also, exporting rice or even wheat and importing pulses, oils, this is a completely unsustainable thing, not only environmentally, but even economically in terms of food security. How many of you are aware that some our pulses, especially tur dal, arhar dal, sometimes even a couple of other dals, chole and all, they come from countries like Africa. The world thinks, Africa is fed by other countries. But Africa feeds us dal. Can you imagine that? Why? Because we have given up on producing our pulses. We have neglected our legumes, our oil seeds, except soya. We have not done any oil seed cultivation, especially leguminous oil seeds, in the last several decades. So we are importing most of the oils. There is a whole import lobby that is created, and there's a whole pulse, import lobby created, oil seed and oil import lobby created, including the big business, which is very active in that. And so we have big economists telling us, so what, if you import pulses and oil seeds, it doesn't matter. If they are cheaper to get from outside, get it. But then what does it make of your Atmanirbhar Bharat? What does this make of your food security? In a country which is the diabetes capital of the world, we are growing more starch, more rice and wheat. So our green revolution is essentially become starch revolution and rice wheat revolution. And it may not have directly led to diabetes, but that we are continuing to do in the world capital of diabetes is a contradiction in terms. And protein malnutrition in India is worse than some of the African countries. This is recorded in the World Development Index, Human Development Index figures. It is among the worst in the whole of South Asia also. These are public figures, well known, and government has not challenged them. So there is a problem in our agriculture as it is currently practiced, especially the big agriculture, not the small farm, small farmer, sustenance or subsistence agriculture, or small farm agriculture. That may not necessarily fit into this description, but most of the big farmer agriculture, farmer producer organization kind of agriculture connected to the big markets, connected to the government procurement, or connected to the corporate procurement, connected to the big bank loans, and all that whole larger ecosystem. The big farmers who are a part of that larger ecosystem are also the same farmers who are largely responsible for the unsustainability. They are the same farmers who are not practicing crop rotation, same farmers who are a part of this import-export tangle. And they're also the ones who are asking for MSP. They're also the ones who are asking for subsidies. They are the ones who are taking all the loans. So there is a problem even among the farmers between haves and have-nots, which I'm sure Ramu knows better. That also is an issue that needs to be handled without necessarily denying farmers as a whole any of the benefits for the important role they play in Indian agriculture and food security. The other important point I want to drive, some of the details may be lost later, so I want to make sure that the main messages are understood right in the beginning. Agriculture is not only a victim of climate change, but agriculture also causes and contributes to climate change. Please make no mistake, the science of it is very well settled. Of course, when climate change happens, erratic weather happens, erratic rain happens, drought happens, pests happen, all of them happen due to climate change, and they will all have very bad impact on agriculture. But it is not that agriculture, when it is not happening, when climate change is not happening or affecting agriculture, like for example, till a few years ago, it is not that agriculture was so innocent or victim. It is, as Ramu said, producing tons of nitrous oxide every year. It is producing tons of ammonia, which is becoming a part of your PM 2.5 particulate matter in the air pollution. And your residue burning is producing a lot of NOx, which also comes from vehicles and energy industries. But NOx also comes from municipal burning, crop burning, residue burning, stubble burning. And it happens all over the country. Don't blame only Punjab and Haryana for it, or Western UP. There are land use changes that have happened, and 24% of the global greenhouse gas emissions way back in 2010 because the data is always collected retrospectively, you come only from agriculture, forestry, and land use change. These three alone, and they're related because sometimes land use change means conversion of forest land to agricultural land or conversion of agricultural land to construction, etc. So these three are related. They alone contribute 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and much more. Most of these emissions actually happen during post-harvest management. So some of it also comes from soils in the crops, but a lot of it also comes from post-harvest, whether in livestock or in the crops. Also, nutrients like the fertilizers, manures, compost, whatever form in which the nutrients are replenished in the soil, they are actually the biggest input that we give other than water for food or feed or fiber production globally. And there is, we have already heard people talking about mere food security without nutritional security is a joke, right? So you need nutritional security, not just food security with starch. And nutritional security means everything: pulses, oils, vitamins, protein malnutrition, minerals, calcium, zinc, everything. So, and we are quite low in the world in terms of nutritional security. Food security without nutritional security means nothing. But even nutritional security or food security without nutrient security is very short-lived. If you import all your fertilizers or your compost or whatever, and then do all your food security production, it's a joke. So nutrient security basically means your ability to produce all the required compost or manure or fertilizer required for your agriculture within your country. The last thing that you want to import is some manure or fertilizer from another country. We actually do. Almost 10% or 15% of our urea is imported even now, despite our consistent investments towards complete self-reliance in domestic urea production. We still haven't crossed 90%. We are importing the rest of the 10%. Some 3 to 5 million tons of urea is imported every year, even now. 20 to 30% of our food systems globally are heavily industrialized, globalized, and are responsible for much of the unsustainability associated with agriculture. So this is the big agriculture, corporate agriculture, or capital-intensive agriculture, where huge power consumption, fuel consumption, and long-distance transport, very little, human intervention, drones, helicopters, all that, they all appear very fashionable, but they actually make it all very unsustainable. In the end, I think as individuals, as consumers, we all should know, we should be happy that we are in India, and where Indian consumer practices in food, especially the traditional ones, are actually far more sustainable than in most other parts of the world. Our consumption of vegetable versus non-vegetarian food, the ratio is much healthier than anywhere in the world, both individually as well as a population. Because when you go to more and more non-vegetarian food, you actually lose a lot of resources in the food chain. So more wastage and less efficiency. So there can also be individual choices that you can make in what you consume, how you consume, whether you can reduce the wastage of food, especially wastage of proteinaceous food, and throw it, or composting is one thing, but still you may have spent 100 rupees in producing the food, you may get only 10 rupees out of it when you take it back as compost, or 1 rupee out of it. So you're also creating a lot of economic wastage in the process. So these are some of the underlying messages that I will try to explain to you in terms of facts and figures in the next 20-30 minutes. This is a picture some of you must have seen on the left. If you describe the anthropogenic abuses to the planet Earth, human-caused uh, uh, disturbances to the health of the planet Earth, you do it by many different ways. You do it by things that cause ocean acidification, aerosol, air pollution, stratospheric ozone depletion, climate change, genetic diversity, because when a lake becomes eutrophicated, all fish die. So the entire biodiversity of the lake is changed in many cities, even in Hyderabad, in many lakes. Forget about drinking water. You can't even bathe in that water because of the quality of water declining so badly. But you revive one lake like Durgam Cheru in Hyderabad, you create a whole urban ecosystem around it. There is a bridge, there is a selfie point, there is boating, there is chaiwala, there is foolwala. So just restoring the health of one lake which does not smell, which does not breed mosquitoes, where if you put your feet in the water, you don't get allergy, even if you don't drink it. That alone is enough to create a whole, economy around it. So reviving land water bodies is becoming a huge issue. And much of the time it is spoiled because of change in biodiversity composition. Similarly, land system change, urban, rural or construction, agriculture, industry, management or misuse of freshwater sources, and of course, the huge misuse or rather unbalanced use of fertilizer nutrients or other nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, about which Ramu has mentioned. Now, if you describe the health of the world in concentric circles, the innermost and show traffic signal colors, green, yellow, red, to describe the zone of the health, ecosystem health. So the innermost circle is the healthy zone. That much abuse to all these changes, the planet can tolerate. Beyond that, some it can tolerate, some it cannot tolerate in the yellow zone. But the moment you reach the red zone, you are increasingly creating irreversible damages to some or the other aspect of planet Earth. And which are the two things that have completely crossed the outermost circle? Nitrogen in the red at the bottom and genetic diversity on the top left. These two have already been damaged to the extent that they may never be reversed completely. Some species are lost permanently. They are probably in the hundreds now or thousands. And nitrogen reversals, some of it climate change, some of it air quality, some of it water quality, may not be entirely reversed anytime soon. And phosphorus is catching up. By the way, where is climate change? Between the two question marks on the top in the yellow zone, and we are shouting. But where is nitrogen and where is phosphorus, where is biodiversity? And we don't even talk about it. So this is also a tragedy of public understanding. This is also a tragedy of governmental insensitivity, that things that have already started causing irreversible damage to the planet are receiving less attention, and things which will cause that damage over the next 30, 40 years is fortunately that has received some attention. And on the right, if you look at these graphs, it's an important thing from the agricultural sustainability point of view. Population graph is on the top right, the first line. So human population has grown hugely in the decades after Green Revolution. In fact, people now estimate that half of the present global population would not have been alive if we did not have Green Revolution. So don't blame Green Revolution for everything. There are some good things it gave, but the bad things it was ignoring for too long. That's the problem. At least half of the humanity probably would not have survived if we did not have that kind of intensification of agriculture. But could we have intensified sustainably? Probably yes. Have we done anything sufficient about it? Probably not. And that's why we are having these kinds of talks. And as you can see, this has happened in close parallel with the growth in fertilizer consumption and fertilizer production in the green curve. So as fertilizer production and consumption grew, food production grew, grain production in particular, population grew. These three depend on one another. But what happened to legumes? globally, it has stagnated. So this is a big problem. One of the important lessons is that globally, the benefits of modern food production have neglected legumes, and that meant that in the total agricultural crop mix, the role of legumes is reduced, increasingly marginalized. And legumes, as you know, bring natural nitrogen fixed from the atmosphere. So neglect of the legumes actually increased your dependent on fertilizers. That is why now farmers increasingly have to repeatedly add more urea, more and more urea, and still they get less and less grain. And this middle bottom graph shows the more you add, the less you get in terms of the returns on investment, in terms of yields against the applied fertilizer. For us, the recommended doses of fertilizer are in the range of 1 to 150 kg nitrogen per hectare, though people are adding 200, 300. But as you can see the graph, the increase in the yield with fertilizer is not uniform. After about 200 kg per hectare fertilizer, the more you add, the less you get. And after 500, it doesn't give you anything at all. So the law of diminishing returns has already started happening globally. And the cornermost right graph is more specifically 40-year data from the rice experiments in the Central Rice Research Institute, Cuttack, what is now called National Rice Research Institute, where the partial factor productivity of nitrogen, that means what is the contribution of nitrogen fertilizer to the total yield, that is called PFPN, or partial factor productivity, versus the total amount of nitrogen fertilizer you are adding. So as the total nitrogen fertilizer increased on the red graph, in the post-Green Revolution decades from the 60s till 2010, the role of nitrogen in the yield actually kept declining. And by the mid-80s, we've already reached that inflection point, after which the more you add, the less you get. And that means today, in India, we know that the fertilizer use efficiency is around 30% for all crops combined. So out of 30 million tons of urea you are using for all crops in India, only around 10 million tons of urea is actually harvested as yield in the various crop outputs that you take as grain or fruit or vegetable or whatever. 20 million tons worth of urea is literally lost from the farmer's field. Either it goes into groundwater and becomes water pollutant, or it goes into, vanishes into air and becomes air pollutant. And not only we lose valuable money, imagine if we were very soon going to reach 3 lakh crores for urea, combining what farmers pay and what the government pays by next year or so, if current trend continues, out of these 3 lakh crores, only 1 lakh crore worth is what you get as the harvest. Imagine losing 2 lakh crores worth of urea literally to air pollution and water pollution every year. Do you remember how much money was paid to buy Air India by Tatas? 20,000 crore. I could have bought 10 Air Indias with 1 year's lost urea. So the value of money is interpreted very differently in different sectors of the economy. And that's an important issue to consider. And there is also a lot of complaining about farmer subsidy, urea subsidies, bill is very high, government subsidies 2 lakh crores, government can't afford. But government just now waived off 12 lakh crores of corporate bad loans from the public sector banks. And government is not complaining. So governments that do not complain when they waive off 12 lakh crores of bad loans from big industries should not complain about having to subsidize 1 lakh crores worth of urea. That does not mean that this is a great thing. That does not mean that wastage should continue. That does not mean that the ecological damage through this wastage should continue. But there is one important fact that we should all remember. While we may not want to join the bandwagon of free market fundamentalists who oppose all subsidies, including in agriculture, we should also understand that today, if sustainable nutrients have to compete with urea, they just can't compete. Even manure cannot compete with urea. If you calculate the total cost of collection, storage, transport, and good machinery for clean handling and all that, government wants to encourage manure and compost and everything, but farmers are not taking because urea is cheaper. Why is urea cheap? Because of subsidy. So you have a problem. Either you have to give subsidy to other things that replace urea to make them, bring them at par, or in fact make them appear cheaper than urea, so that farmer also saves some money in the process, or you may have to remove subsidy for urea. So these are very important dilemmas, policy dilemmas, that everybody interested in sustainable agriculture have to think about. So a little bit of science and ecology now, because this is context of agriculture. So don't get intimidated with the complicated flow chart. Basically, on the left column, you have various sources of reactive nitrogen, because 78% of the air we breathe is just elemental nitrogen, N2 gas, which is totally harmless. Nothing happens. We are breathing 78% of nitrogen as air into our lungs every second, absolutely harmless. But it is not useful for food production. So we have to convert that into urea for fertilizer. All urea does not become harvest. Some of it goes down into water pollution, so the yellow arrows downwards, or some of it goes up into air pollution, the yellow arrows upwards. And some animal, some crop are produced not only for direct human consumption, but also for animal feed. So from food, we move to feed. And then there are some losses in between. And in fact, the animal, waste, the dung, the bird dropping, all the other livestock waste can easily come back to the farming system as an effective manure. But the current levels of manure recycling are not adequate. A lot of it is lost. Again, back into air pollution, water pollution, and increasing our dependence on fertilizer. And in the process, we also lead to releases of ammonia and NOx and various other things into the air. Eventually, some of the surface runoff goes into either groundwater or into tanks, lakes, rivers. Even our coastal regions in the sea, in the Indian Peninsula, there are many zones where fish are dying and toxic algal blooms are happening. So there is a wider ecological damage because of what should have been a nitrogen cycle has now become a nitrogen cascade. Now, what's the difference between nitrogen cycle and nitrogen cascade? There is a natural process of generating reactive nitrogen from unreactive nitrogen. This reactive nitrogen is used by all the living organisms. But when the organisms die or in their wastes, they come back as inorganic nitrogen through bacterial action. Some of it is called denitrification. So if natural nitrification and natural denitrification are matched with each other, there is no net nitrogen pollution. But what is happening, this is how 10,000 years agriculture has survived sustainably, because natural nitrification, including anthropogenic nitrification like growing legumes, has balanced the natural denitrification, maybe slight spillover, but that was not big enough to cause any concern. It is the industrialized manufacture of nitrogen through Haber-Bosch process which has made anthropogenic nitrification on industrial scale. So there is natural nitrification. Over and above that, there is industrial nitrification. But denitrification, there is no industrial process. So denitrification has to be done by bacteria. And that capacity is not adequate. So human alteration of what should have been the nitrogen cycle, nitrification, denitrification, continuously cycling, has been exceeded by twice. That means the capacity of denitrification is half the current capacity of nitrification, or the current anthropogenic nitrification, both natural or industrial, is twice the natural capacity of denitrification. So that's the basic crux of the question, the nitrogen question. How do you bring them back into balance? How do you prevent it from becoming a cascade and make it more into a cycle? And once you bring into a cycle, it is not only the biogeochemical cycle, it is also a part of a circular economy. So when you bring nitrogen cycle, when you restore nitrogen cycle, when you restore carbon cycle, when you restore all biogeoelemental cycles, you also restore economic cycles. These two are very closely interlinked. A quick summary on where the world is and where India is with respect to different kinds of nitrogen pollutants. Again, traffic signal colors are used, at least in the first one and also the last one. The middle one, well, the red is the most intense the red color, the highest the pollution of either NOx in the top. NOx is a combination of nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide, NO2. So there and nitric oxide is very unstable, whereas nitrogen dioxide is more stable. So this is what should be normally measured in the case of NOx. So nitrogen dioxide, you look at all the red spots in the world. The northwestern part of India is very clearly visible. Some part of Africa is visible. The entire Europe is in the yellow-red. The entire China is in yellow-red. Some pockets of northern half of America is in yellow-red. But clearly, the northwestern and also the southeast axis of India and the northwestern axis of India clearly show there is a lot of excess NOx being generated in the troposphere. The middle graph map, these are recent figures of 2018, 2019 kind of data publications, but the data may belong to a few years earlier to that. Nitrous oxide, the third most important greenhouse gas, is in the middle map. India is in the red as much as parts of South America, Europe, and China. Only the North Africa, the Thar region of North Africa is unaffected. Parts of Australia are unaffected, but rest of the world are heavily affected. Now, last one is ammonia, and the largest source of ammonia emission is improperly handled manure and urine and waste that goes into our sewage, wastewater and solid waste. Look at the whole of northwestern India, starting from parts of Pakistan side of Punjab, right down to through the UP and bordering the northeast, Bihar, UP, Western UP, Punjab, Haryana, the whole northwest belt. There is a huge ammonia cloud for most part of the year, which is also contributing heavily to particulate matter, dust pollution, and haze and aerosols, and in fact, the smog in winters in the northwest India because of the ammonia pollution. And this does not get dispersed because of the Himalayas on the north. Otherwise, it would have been dispersed by wind flow. So Himalayas act as a barrier. And still, there is enough ammonia pollution emerging from India to pollute the whole of Bhutan, to pollute the whole of Nepal with our ammonia. So there are serious cross-border influences when tomorrow, just like we are saying, we are suffering due to European and American industrial carbon. Tomorrow, you can't hide behind that slogan for too long. Very soon, our own colleagues from Bhutan and Nepal and even some Bangladesh will argue with you, they are suffering from Indian nitrogen. So if you are asking for reparations and climate funds from America, Europe for carbon, are you willing to give the same funds to Nepal, Bhutan and Bangladesh? So sometimes these economic arguments can be a trap in themselves. They can also, they are often given as a justification to do nothing, saying this whole climate is a Western problem. We did not cause it, so we don't have to repair it. But then that argument, same argument can be given by Bhutan or Nepal against India. and we have nowhere to hide if we are sold to this logic. Instead, if we take a more inclusive collective approach of a whole region with an agreed shared sustainability formula, not only we can stop damage to each other's environment by taking the right actions, we can actually work as a bloc, South Asia bloc, to deal with the rest of the world, including in leading by example on how not to invite a situation where you have to pay climate reparations. Now, this is the health impact where NOx from fossil fuels, very recent data in Lancet Public Health. Again, darker the color, stronger the NOx pollution and its impact on childhood asthma. Most of you living in big cities know, including in India and abroad, that childhood asthma is a global problem, especially in the countries with higher air pollution. And this data shows that India is among the world leaders in childhood asthma, because we are among the world leaders in air pollution. And the table below is a CPCB table that shows various effects of major air pollutants, inorganic air pollutants. Carbon dioxide, only direct climate change. Carbon monoxide, some direct health effect and indirect climate effect. Hydrocarbons, health effect, but very indirect. But NOx, direct health effect, indirect health effect, acid rain effect, eutrophication effect, visibility effect, climate effect. All effects are there in NOx. Particulate matter also comes indirectly from combination of NOx and ammonia, becoming dry deposition and wet deposition in the air as ammonium nitrate. So even PM, particulate matter, and NOx have combined effects. And SOx is sulfur dioxide pollution. So even among the major air pollutants, nitrogen-related air pollutants have far more devastating effects, not just on climate, but on many more things than carbon. So nitrogen is not just the new carbon. It is much worse. Carbon may have bigger impact on climate, but nitrogen has impact on your drinking water, on your health, on your asthma, on everything. And it's happening right now. It is not something into the future. And the WHO data on the right shows over 2 million people are dying in South Asia alone due to particulate matter air pollution, out of which 1.7 million deaths are happening only in India. And government of India has not contested these figures. So 1.7 million people dying not due to infectious diseases, but due to plain anthropogenic air pollution, not that too through all air pollution, only particulate matter air pollution, only PM 2.5. To that, if you add all the other air pollutants, that will already cross the entire toll of COVID. More people are lost to air pollution and water pollution than we lost to COVID. COVID, we may have lost such people in 1 year, but we are losing the same numbers year after year after year. And this is the water impact on dissolved inorganic nitrogen and dissolved organic nitrogen. The red dots and the red regions show more serious pollution than the yellow and the blue and green. So both in terms of dissolved inorganic nitrogen, the water pollution in Indian subcontinent is very high, even higher in China and parts of East Asia. But even organic dissolved nitrogen, as you can see, there is significant water body damage, especially in the northwestern part of India. And when the water bodies turn from blue to green and green to brown and brown to red, it is all because of continuous decline in the oxygen content, light passage, change in algal species, causing oxygen depletion, death of fish, and eventually affecting the livelihood of fishermen. That water not even fit for tourism. Forget about fishing or water. You can't even do boating. You go to Manila Bay or even to some of the lakes, even in Nainital Lake, now spelling the popular tourist destination in summer near Pantnagar, Nainital Lake now smells of dead fish. So people may not even want to take a boat ride or even what is called that ropeway ride over the Nainital lake because it stinks. So does Kashmir's Dal Lake, and so does your Chilka Lake and many other major lakes, let alone your lakes in Hyderabad or elsewhere in the country. Now come on a whole South Asian scale, if you have to do some apportioning the blame for total nitrogen pollution on different human sectors, whom do you blame? For NOx emissions, more than 2/3, or in fact more than 80-90% of all your NOx emissions, the extreme right pie chart, come from outside agriculture. Mostly electricity, energy generation, transport, vehicles, fossil fuel burning, industrial use of fuels, including fertilizer manufacture, and so on. So NOx emission from agriculture is only 6%, and even that is largely due to residue burning and stubble burning. If you don't do residue burning and stubble burning, even that 6% NOx emission from agriculture can be removed. Or maybe there is some from livestock related stuff, but at least from crops you can avoid. If you avoid any burning, inefficient burning, NOx is avoided. Come to the middle graph, 86% of all ammonia emission all over South Asia, as recently as 2018, came from agriculture alone, including crops and livestock. In fact, much more from livestock manure that is unutilized, probably, than from unutilized fertilizer. Because urea also emits ammonia if it is volatilized before it is converted into nitrate. And we know that even neem-coated urea is unable to stop ammonia emission, though it is slowing down nitrification, it is not slowing down urea's activity. So we are recommending neem-coated urea should actually incorporate a urease inhibitor for it to be more effective. If you can't avoid that fertilizer, at least make it more efficient. Then the first leftmost extreme is the nitrous oxide emission, which again 78% comes from agriculture, including crops and livestock. Therefore, there is some truth in the blame game that agriculture is contributing to air pollution, water pollution, and climate change, and not just a victim. And it is not only the industry which is the main problem. And India alone accounts for more than 2/3 to 3/4 of the total South Asian load in each of these three different nitrogen pollutants. So if you control nitrogen pollution in India, you control it in all over South Asia. What is the contribution of small countries like Maldives or Bhutan or Nepal? The main big fellows are India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. 4 countries, 95% of all environmental problems to the remaining 4 countries out of 8 countries of South Asia. Now, this is another important lesson that came out of Indian nitrogen assessment, which we published in 2017. It is on the basis of that Indian government took the resolution to the United Nations. If you arrange all the major sources of nitrous oxide emission in the decreasing order and compare them for the year 2000 to 2010, that means over 1 decade how much change has happened, and you convert that change into percent compounded annual growth rate, CAGR, you get a very different picture. Where is agriculture? Down below in the green, underlined. The absolute amount of emission from agriculture is very high. It is the topmost, 186 gigagrams of nitrous oxide in 2000, and even in 2010 it became 261, and now by 2020 it probably became 400 or more. But annual growth rate is only 3.5%, and that growth rate is still not increased. It is probably below 3% now. But look at waste, especially wastewater, your sewage, nalas. The absolute quantity appeared to be less, only 13 gigagrams in 2000, but it became 43. It grew threefold in a decade. The annual compounded growth rate is 12.68%. And we actually did this calculation. If you add 12%, 12.68% to the 43 gigagram every year from 2011 to 2023 and compare it with adding 3.4% to the agricultural emission of 261, again 23 times. Actually, agriculture is no longer the single biggest contributor to nitrous oxide from Indian environment. Waste is a much bigger, though we have to prove it by actually getting this data. There is a few years of lag, so you may get it out only in a couple of years from now. But our estimate is that wastewater, lost nutrients in wastewater may already be a much bigger source of nitrous oxide than the lost fertilizer or manure from farmers' fields. And there is a big revelation. Of course, for fertilizer industry, it is music to their ears, but for the municipalities, it is not good news because they are sitting on big mountains of nutrients recovered from wastewater, and they are unable to bring it back to the farming fields. We are doing these projects in Delhi and Hyderabad. I'll talk about them in a minute. Our colleague Himanshu Pathak, who is now the DG ICAR, and his colleagues have shown many times that if you look at all the greenhouse gases from Indian agriculture alone, methane production from rice fields has more or less stabilized for us, but its growth rate is very negligible. Whereas nitrous oxide emission from soils and fertilizers has continuously increased throughout the Green Revolution period from 1970 to 2010 and continues to 2022. And today, the total contribution of nitrous oxide is much higher than the total contribution by methane. So methane used to be the second largest greenhouse gas from Indian agriculture. Now, not now, for more than 10 years, nitrous oxide is the second largest greenhouse gas from Indian agriculture, not methane. And we still only talk about carbon and not nitrogen. That's a big tragedy. Part of the tragedy is also because the IPCC and the UNFCCC, in order to simplify the complex communication of science for policymakers and politicians, instead of writing a whole long list of greenhouse gases, they converted all of them into carbon dioxide equivalents. So even methane was expressed as carbon dioxide into 40 times because more powerful gas, though quantitatively less. Nitrous oxide is expressed as carbon dioxide into 365 times. There are others which are even more powerful. And that has helped communicating climate science to decision makers and people. But the downside of it was people think climate is only about carbon. Even many climate people now find it very surprising if we tell them, no, nitrogen is there. It is in fact 300 times, or the latest figure is 265 times as per the recent IPCC assessment, 265 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Which means if you have to reach net zero carbon, you don't have to reach it only through carbon dioxide reduction. You could reach it through methane reduction. You could even reach it through nitrous oxide reduction. And we believe in the Indian nitrogen community that for India, the transition to net zero through nitrogen is a far more feasible, sustainable, economically cheaper route than going through exclusively carbon route. Ideally, you could have a ratio of both. Now, this is an important table that I want you to focus on, the two colored columns. This is basically the cereal cultivation, the main cereals, wheat, rice, maize in major parts of the world. Total of all three cereals in the middle column. Then legumes, oilseed legumes, pulse legumes, all grain legumes. And then the percent area occupied by legumes as a part of legume cereal combined. In South America, Latin America, 60% of the area occupied by major grains, food grains, including cereals and legumes, was allocated for legumes. In India and South Asia, it has come down to below 30%. Even in Africa, it is still 40%. In US, it is very close to 50-50, 48%. So what does it mean? It means that different countries have used Green Revolution differently. We spoiled Green Revolution by neglecting legumes and oilseeds and groundnut and sesame and the oilseed legumes. We went into cereals. We went into, of course, soybean is also a legume. But other than soybean, your palm oil is a waste, both nutritionally and environmentally. Your lot of other oils do not contribute to leguminous contribution. So your crop rotations are totally destroyed. Cereal oil, cereal anything, but without legume is the main reason why we have all become slaves to urea, and why even government has become a slave to urea subsidy, because it does not want to lose another election. And farmers have already bargained very hard against the 3 farm laws only a year ago. So this is a major lesson in our transition to sustainable nitrogen management. We have to bring back a good healthy mix of legumes and cereals in every major intensive cropping zone. In non-intensive subsistence zones, probably it is already quite healthy. But it is the intensive zones of Green Revolution areas, like coastal districts, the northwestern part of India, the main food grain procurement regions of India. There they have to insist that alternative cultivation of legume with any other crop, legume cereal, legume fruit, legume flower, legume tea, legume coffee, legume anything, is what we need to do. If you do that, you can straight away reduce your fertilizer bill by half in the very first year. Within 1 year, you can save 2 lakh crores if you simply bring legumes into the cropping mix in all the areas of the country. This will not happen because I say so or you say so. Even government says the reason why they don't want to procure rice wheat is because they want to force farmers to diversify. But they are not going to diversify as long as you have some procurement of rice wheat. It is not their fault. They are producing what government is buying. So the only way for the government as the biggest buyer to influence what farmers cultivate is to actually start procuring pulses and oil seeds, especially leguminous oil seeds. You may not procure in big quantity, but you trigger a farmer's change of what they produce by introducing procurement at MSP for legumes and pulses. This is not good news for most of the market fanatic economists who are advising the government. But eventually, it is the political reality. It is an inescapable formula of sustainability. Without stimulating through some kind of a carrot and stick mix of subsidies, without procurement diversification, crop diversification will not happen. So that's my big message. Crop diversification without procurement diversification is a pipe dream. And when I say procurement diversification, I mean at MSP. Same thing. Transition from fertilizer to organic farming will continue to be a marginal force in India as long as fertilizer gets a heavy subsidy and as long as organic farm inputs do not get necessary inputs. So if you don't subsidize manure, if you don't subsidize composting, if you don't subsidize any of the alternatives to fertilizer, people naturally fall back to fertilizer. So there is no escape. Removing fertilizer subsidy can only be done after you have made alternatives to fertilizer as affordable or more affordable than fertilizer. This is another simple socio-economic reality, political reality, if only government wants to consider and care. Recently, Professor Lada has produced this data to show that we have already become Vishwaguru in fertilizer consumption. We are second largest in the world in terms of fertilizer consumption in major crops like rice, wheat, maize. And the gap between India and China, which is the single largest consumer, is not very high. So within a few years, we may even overtake China. I saw in some of the questions, what are the crops that are used in the rotation with cereals? So this table on the right, I hope it is readable, has examples like groundnut, peanut, pigeon pea, chicken pea, Bengal gram, soybean, which is already in excess. We don't need more of soybean. We need more of others. Horse gram, common bean, dry bean, French bean, ordinary pea, broad bean, groundnut, black gram, mung bean, green gram. So all these are very, very important. Their oils are also very good quality. They are better than, in fact, the nutritionally speaking, sesame oil, till oil, which is very popular in the south, is as good as olive oil. And what tons of olive oil is imported every year, draining huge, foreign exchange, simply because people think it is healthier than all the oils we take. But our own sesame oil is as good as olive oil in terms of its nutritional quality, and it's also a legume, so it gives you nitrogen and saves fertilizer. So there are multiple win-wins if you incorporate legume as a part of every cropping mix in every intensive crop zone in the country. The non-incentive zones are already doing it. Most of you organic farming enthusiasts probably already have one legume as a part of your cropping mix, which is what makes you more sustainable than the conventional green revolution kind of farming. You are able to get similar yields with less fertilizer simply because you have some legume or the other in your cropping mix in most of the organic farming or natural farming systems in the country. Well, I probably have taken quite a bit of your time, so I will summarize this very quickly. How did the Indian leadership in global nitrogen management come about? Because we scientists some 20 years ago thought, if the entire drama on carbon repeat itself in nitrogen, are we again going to run for cover, or are we going to prepare in advance? So Professor Abrol was there, and many other of our colleagues from various institutions were there, and they all agreed that we should learn our lessons from the carbon and implement them in nitrogen. And the only way to do that is to get our own house in order, understand our own nitrogen cycle for India, bring together all people working in all sectors of the nitrogen cycle, whether industry, transport, agriculture, soil science, agronomy, atmospheric science, space, GIS, forestry. And so the Indian Nitrogen Group was formed very early, some 20 years ago. It was formally declared in 2006, came out in public in 2008. We also became the Indian affiliate of the International Nitrogen Initiative. We hosted the INI conference in India in 2010. We also became an NGO partner for UNEP Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, GPNM, in 2009. I am the representative from Indian NGOs in GPNM. We partnered with the South Asia Cooperative Program more than about 10 years ago. We set up a Sustainable India Trust to give more focus around SDGs and nitrogen and nutrients in 2014. We published this photograph cover book of Indian nitrogen assessment in 2017. We co-hosted a nitrogen session in the World Environment Day that India hosted in 2018. In 2019, we took the nitrogen resolution and helped the Indian diplomats to negotiate it in the 4th UN Environment Assembly. And having done that, we established our global leadership, intergovernmental leadership on sustainable nitrogen management. Later, Sri Lanka brought a second resolution in 2021. And now, next year, February, there will be another UN Environment Assembly 6, in which there may be a third resolution. So the global engagement on nitrogen is now a kind of a process which is gathering steam. Also, for your information, the countries that have signed up to the Sustainable Nitrogen Management Resolution have also set up an intergovernmental nitrogen working group, NWG, to which every member country has appointed one nodal person. From India, Professor Ramesh Ramachandran, the former director of uh, uh, Center for Sustainable Coastal Management, Chennai, used to be the chair person. Now Purvaja Ramachandran, current director, is the person. This intergovernmental nitrogen working group has two co-chairs, and India is one of the co-chairs, Purvaja Ramachandran. So not only India has led a resolution for the first time, India is now actually leading the implementation of that resolution along with Romania as the co-chair globally. Since this year, 2023 January, India is literally a Vishwaguru or a co-chair of global sustainable nitrogen management implementation. And all this has happened because, not because the governments wanted it, but because science was letting it, was pushing for it. So this was one of those rare cases where evidence-based policy, evidence-based government, and evidence-based diplomacy came together in a manner that was totally unprecedented in the history of Indian science. So this is a published timeline that shows how the Indian events in South Asian events in nitrogen management at the bottom, right since 2003 till 2021, 2023, and the global events have actually happened in parallel. So we did not come up for nitrogen because some white man told us. We came up independently, and we came up around the same time as other countries came up in the West, such as INI. INI's birth in 2003, and our birth in 2006 were closely, we started discussions in 2003, but formalized in 2006. So we had independent origins. And this also shows that all this did not happen in 1 year or 2 years or in one government or one party. This happened across many governments with many, over many years, over 20 years. So this is an example where long-term science towards relevant science, towards socially meaningful science, towards sustainability commitment in science goes hand in hand with the political process, with the diplomatic process to deliver tangible results to the country and to the world. So this is the 2018-19 Frontiers Annual Report of UN Environment Agency, UNEP, in which nitrogen, reactive nitrogen, has been identified as one of the 5 most compelling threats to the planet Earth. That led to these 2 resolutions, which I have shown on the slide on the right. The top resolution was led by India in 2019. The second resolution was led by Sri Lanka in 2022. Both are called Sustainable Nitrogen Management. And we had contributed to all these 3, including that UNEP Frontiers report. Now, out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which all of you by now must be knowing by heart, whether livelihood, poverty, hunger, health, education, gender, forest, life below land, life below water, life above land, all of them have a linkage with nitrogen. Nitrogen is one of the few things that actually connects with all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And every country that cares for transition towards Sustainable Development Goals should seriously consider incorporating nitrogen management as a part of its nationally determined contributions towards each of the 17 SDGs. So you can contribute to all 17 SDGs by embracing nitrogen as your major mechanism to do it. I'm not saying nitrogen alone will be enough to deliver all that, but nitrogen is one of those important things through which you can touch all the 17 SDGs. And this was actually adopted as a resolution in the last conference of the INI in Berlin. And we are going to restate some of these slogans in the next conference of the INI, which we are holding in New Delhi, in our university, in February next year. So end 2024. So though I am a biotechnologist by training, biologist by training, we had to do a lot of environmental research with the help of other environmental scientists, some of them in collaboration with many South Asian partners and outsiders. We also did policy papers, policy research, because policy experts, policy makers, bureaucrats, governments don't understand research papers. They need simplified capsule form of all the science condensed into simple policy documents. We have done a lot of that. This is just another example. Right now, as we speak, our policy papers are already submitted to South Asia Nitrogen Cooperation under the SACEP, South Asian Cooperative Environment Program, SARC body. Each of the governments has a national nitrogen report, policy report. Some have already been accepted, some are being accepted. Our own nitrogen policy report is ready to be launched. And this is a thankless job that we scientists have to do. This doesn't give us any direct career benefits or recognitions as scientists. People don't consider this as a scientific contribution. But yet we believe this is our role in the science society interface, and we have to do that, whatever is the cost associated with it. Just half a minute to tell you, recovering lost nutrients, which ideally belong to the farmer's field, but a lot of them are found in the gutters, in the lakes, in the sewage nalas, in the tanks. They can actually be brought back. These technologies are available. So we did a preliminary study in Delhi across 5 different technological categories of sewage treatment, only liquid sewage, and found that their nutrient removal capacity has huge variation. And by little tweaking of the existing technologies and by increasing the scale of wastewater treatment, which is currently 90%, Hyderabad is reaching 100% later this year. Probably will be the first mega metropolitan city of India to reach 100% sewage water treatment capable city of India. Second city after Hyderabad in India will be Delhi. So we did this first study in Delhi with a UNEP project. We are going to replicate this study on a much bigger scale. We just signed the memorandum with the UNEP environment program yesterday. And we are also replicating it in Hyderabad, incorporating all the major sewage treatment plants in Hyderabad and also addressing the ecosystem health of the major lakes in Hyderabad. So we need to bring the ecosystem health, the surface water body health, the groundwater body health with sustainable agriculture and sustainable nutrient management. They cannot be treated in separate silos. They have to be treated as interconnected areas. So this is just some data in case for Delhiites it may be more of interest. Different STPs, different nutrient removal rates. The bottommost one, Akshardham, the most recent and the most efficient, using the membrane-based biofilm technology, removes 93% of the ammonical compounds, 73% of the phosphate, and 89% of the nitrate from wastewater. All of it can come back into the farmer's field. I have calculated that if you actually bring back all the manure and all these urban wastes back into the farmer's field, you can minimize your fertilizer dependency to a barely top-up level. Maybe 80–90% fertilizer, or at least 2/3 of the fertilizer, you can give up within 5 years. If first you go for legume-based crop mix, then you go for recycling all the manure available, all the compost available, and then all the nutrients recovered from solid waste and liquid waste. Then if you still have some crop requirement deficiency, add the fertilizer, no problem. I don't believe in being very puritanical about fertilizer. I believe it should be treated as only as a top up, not as the basal dose. So nitrogen use efficiency means different things to different people, and part of the problem in our failure in achieving this is because all of us look at this from our own limited perspective, and in the end we end up working at cross purposes. This happens between governments, this happens between disciplines in science, this happens between industry and academia, even happens between civil society and academia and industry. There are a lot of commonalities if only we identify and synergize. Of course, Ramu knows this very well, but for others who are interested in the science of it, there are many ways of defining nitrogen use efficiency, and that's a part of the complexity. But we have to take into consideration losses of nitrogen from the soil and from the plant also, and minimize those losses so that whatever you add, if it is retained in the crop, then there is no pollution, then there is no wastage, then you can live with it, even if it means that much money has to be spent. Right now, you are spending all the money and buying all the pollution. And that is bad both ways. If you are, I used to say government used to give 75% subsidy to urea till a few years ago. Now it has become 92%. And 25-30% was the nitrogen use efficiency. So that means farmer is paying 25% of the urea market price, and he is getting that much harvest. Government was paying 75%, now it is 92%. It is only buying pollution with all its 92% money. That's a big tragedy, and that should be avoided. And where do you begin? If you really have to improve nitrogen use efficiency in the Indian agricultural system, as you can see, the biggest nitrous oxide emissions come from agriculture. We showed that before. This is an old data, 61. Now we know it is almost 80%. On the right top, where does this agricultural emission come from? 77% of agricultural emission come from fertilizer. Now it is 80+%. But where is all this fertilizer used? 2/3 of all the urea used in India goes into rice wheat, and maybe some non-legume crops, little bit. So if you have to increase nitrogen use efficiency in India, if you have to reduce urea dependence in India, you have to begin by reducing fertilizer demand in rice, wheat, and non-legume crops. And the best way of doing it to reduce the demand by 50% is to start a legume in every single cropping mix, every single cropping system, at least wherever it is not happening. And over and above that, bring all the manure, bring all the waste nutrients. Over and above that, add fertilizer if you must, but only if you must. That's our formula for sustainable nitrogen management. So these are these summary actions. You have to improve nitrogen use efficiency in crop production with legume rotation and minimizing fertilizer dependence. You have to improve nitrogen use efficiency in animal production, livestock, by reducing meat consumption if possible. We promote demetarianism. Demetarianism is 50% reduction of meat by American and European standard, because their daily meat consumption is twice their own health requirements. Our is much more closer to our natural requirement, so we need not have to decrease on a national scale. Maybe a few very excessively well-fed meat-dependent individuals who take it 3 times a day can take it less than 3 times a day. That is enough. India is probably one of the few countries in the world, and Andhra is probably one of the few states in India where meat and saag are cooked together, and it's a delicacy. Meat combined with dal or meat combined with saag, a green leaf vegetable, is not found anywhere in the world, not even all over India. So there are some very unique, aspects to the Indian food habits that we need to recognize and promote, and that might help even in terms of consumer linkage to sustainable nitrogen management. Sometimes people ask us, What can I as a consumer do? I'm not a farmer, and I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not a scientist, I'm not industrialist. Can I do something? So we tell them this: just take only as much protein as you need, and reduce your meat by half. Combine meat with salads and or take gongura mutton, or take chana dal with chicken or whatever, as they do in Andhra. So in transport industry, we need to further reduce the emissions from fuels. Industries in particular, where NOx capture is available, but it is not practiced in India very heavily. The Western NOx reduction in Europe and US has been achieved to the tune of 30% by using available existing technologies. Though they add to the cost of the industry, that cost has been passed to the consumer, but it is possible. They are doing it. So our PM 2.5 is largely because of our NOx emission and ammonia emission. NOx from fossil fuel burning and ammonia emission from manure and crops, together contributing to PM 2.5. And in the industry, we can reduce NOx release by bringing NOx scrubbing technologies available. And in the agriculture, we can reduce ammonia by simply using all the manure with best practices and going to legumes and reducing fertilizers. Of course, you should reduce wastage, recycle, reuse, recover from waste water systems, like I showed you. Consumer patterns. You should not stay very far away from your workplace and burn diesel or petrol every day to travel. People used to stay very close to the workplace. Only 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, every big employer in India, whether government or private, used to lease out quarters or build their own quarters to have all the employees staying within walking distance. Chidambaram increased the HRA, house rent allowance, reduced the housing loan, and destroyed the sustainability of transport. People now work in Hyderabad, but probably commute from Rangareddy, Sangareddy, and wherever, even Warangal. Every day they are burning fuel because it is cheaper to own a home there. You can't own a home in the middle of Hyderabad. So this is a problem. So sustainable cities, sustainable housing, and living close to the workplace, all this adds to sustainable nitrogen management. Not just blaming the agriculture, not just blaming fertilizer, but you also have to do something, even in agriculture. Thank you. And zero budget natural farming is not a very good solution. It has been tried out. This graph in Nature Sustainability shows, even if you combine all the best methods of zero budget natural farming, only 30% of the current requirement of nitrogen in the soil is actually possible to be met. Remaining 70% will be a deficiency. You may not realize in 1 year, 2 years, but within 3-4 years, your soils will become starved of nitrogen and other things. So by itself, if you don't bring other things, including manure, puritanical zero budget natural farming is not going to deliver sustainable nitrogen management or even nutrient management. So there are also many myths within the organic farming community. They also need to be addressed. We need to bring the best combination of scientifically validated nutrient management practices, combining the traditional and the organic farming practices with the best evidence from the science, and then one can get the best of both worlds. And that's what I as a person and we as a Sustainable India Trust promote. And there's an article on this in UN Perspectives available in public domain. You can search it out on Google or find it on my university homepage. Also, there are many intergovernmental international processes like biodiversity, like climate change, long-range transboundary air pollution, Global Program of Action on Marine Pollution, World Trade Organization, Montreal Protocol. All of them have even UN Committee to combat desertification. Now sustainable food systems is coming up, and the whole UN SDG itself has come up as a body. all of them have something to do with nitrogen. And this is both a problem and an opportunity. Problem because you have to deal with so many separate intergovernmental bodies. They have their own priorities. Nitrogen is everywhere among them, but not visible in any of them. Nobody talks of nitrogen in any of them separately. But they all agree that yes, nitrogen is a part of their agenda. So being everywhere is as good as being nowhere. So there is a tragedy of fragmentation of nitrogen across multiple international bodies. But then the opportunity, if you want one world, if you want one sustainable world, if you have to work as one UN, if you have to work interdisciplinary manner, you have to address nitrogen in each of those bodies. Maybe you can have some kind of a joint coordination committee on nitrogen with each of those existing bodies rather than creating another IPCC for nitrogen. If the world wants to do another IPCC for nitrogen, we will welcome it, but still it has to work with all the others with respect to biodiversity, with respect to climate change, with respect to other things. Thank you very much. And sorry if I've taken a bit longer, probably much longer than I had originally thought of.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you very much. And it is indeed a very enlightening presentation. And in fact, it being such a very important issue and a very complex issue, obviously it takes time. I think it's worth spending that time to understand the key issues. Getting back to the questions, can I take some few important questions which people?
Sure,
yeah.
Sure.
And I think
some of them I tried to answer during the talk, but we can go about one by one.
One by one, yes. So many of the questions were answered actually from the fertilizers point of view and all. And when the fertilizer use is going down significantly, right? Data shows that fertilizer use is going down significantly, and your data itself shows that we are polluting a lot. Switching over towards organic need not be a binary thing. I would say organic or conventional, certainly. But having a targeted approach to reduce chemical fertilizer use, increasing the organic manure and then recycling of crop residues so that we can move towards a system where use efficiency of fertilizers also can increase. Don't you see that as a major approach one need to look at?
No, absolutely. I think the targeted approach is the best approach. And taking the best features from modern as well as traditional and the sustainable and organic farming practices is the way to move forward. People may brand it in whatever way they like for their own reasons, but farmers on the ground, from whatever little I understood or heard, don't take anything in a very puritan manner. They deal with the agricultural science people, they deal with the CSA kind of people, they deal with zero budget natural farming kind of people. They don't want to antagonize anybody. They want to try everything that makes a difference to them. Indian farmers are among the most progressive farmers in the world. They have adopted every new thing you offered them, provided it actually made a difference to them on the ground. What did not make a difference to them, they have rejected, if not immediately, after 3-4 years or 5 years. So you see in some areas from non-food crop, GM crop has grown. But in some other areas, it has not been accepted. Or in the long run, they may or may not accept. So we don't know. What I'm saying is they're open to novelty, they're open to ideas, and they want to try. And because they're desperate, on the ground reality is that farmers are desperate, input costs are rising, output prices are falling, and if there is no guaranteed MSP across the board, not just government, but across the whole procurement, whether government or private, which is what farmers are demanding, the whole desperation of the farmers is only going to grow.
Yes.
And this is a huge problem. So in the targeted approach, I would say just take a 3-phase approach. First, try and see which legume is most suitable, either pulse legume or oilseed legume, most suitable for your soil type, your agroclimate, or for your economic, market linkages, do that. Have at least one or two, if possible, in the mix, either as a mixed cultivation or as a rotation. First thing, that alone will reduce your fertilizer demand, including even manure demand for the next crop. After that, bring all the manure that you can, all the waste that you can, all the compost that you can. Still, if you need fertilizer, okay, no problem. Take whether you use what is called neem-coated urea or even nano urea, no problem. With nano urea, the only problem is at least 3 seasons, 3 years, at least 2 seasons per year, data is required for every single crop, for every single agroclimatic zone, for every single soil type, before one can make a blanket recommendation that nano urea or any nano fertilizer, for that matter, any other fertilizer. Why only nano? This is a standard practice of all product development. You had to do that even for drug trials, for medicines, for vaccines. Only when there was a national emergency, you went for clearance to Covaxin only based on second trial. Otherwise, phase 3 clinical trial is absolutely necessary for any drug approval or vaccine approval. We are back to that after COVID. So if there is no national emergency, even field trials for fertilizers, whether nano or other fertilizers, should be conducted for 6 years, 3 years, 6 seasons for every crop, and then make a recommendation. What government has done is, because partly they could not get data during the COVID years, they also could not get all data for all crops for all seasons. But for whatever reason, the government was in a hurry. The import bill was rising, the subsidy bill was rising. Government also needed to show something new that they're offering to the farmers. It's an important constituency for every political party. Elections are around the corner. So they went ahead and released a nano urea as a promising product. And we hope it is a promising product. I don't know. I can't say for sure whether it will eventually stand scrutiny after several years. But we should try. We should try everything new before we accept or reject. Normally, government should not introduce them in a hurry. But if they are done, it's okay. The farmers eventually will try out and accept or reject. Even industry will eventually adapt to the market reality. If it doesn't sell, why will the industry produce? So, but if it does, why won't it produce?
But the whole question was like chemical fertilizers, what we are seeing today for 60, 70 years, artificially supported by the government. We reached a situation today. So when there is a intervention by the government, it will actually distort the choices of the people, because it won't be a free choice by the people based on its efficiency. So I think that's what will be the worry when it comes to the government policies. So coming back to your argument, one of your slide talked about ZBNF. I would say from my own experience, at least working in this space for a longer time, like conventional agriculture is seen very Puritan approach. Alternatives are also equated with ZBNF in the same Puritan approach. ZBNF is not the only approach in alternative space. There are many other organic practices in the country, and we have seen use efficiency. There are many more products which can be done. Unfortunately, the way it was articulated was wrong. I will, at least having worked on this for over 20 years, I can say that, and then probably we can discuss this further, how that models can be improved. I would say the whole set of alternative agroecological practices and regenerative agriculture practices, how we can improvise them is something we
You're on mute, Dr. Ramu.
No, I got this. Sorry,
No,
I
can hear you.
Yeah, you're back.
There was some signal problem. No, I'm saying with the whole lot of experience in the alternative agroecology and regenerative agriculture, certainly very promising to be taken forward, but it also requires scientific understanding. And I think that is something which is very important. Sir, Rao, before opening up for the participants, a couple of other questions from my side.
Okay.
When we are talking about shift towards legumes, I think the key question seems to be cropping pattern change. It's not about organic farming or natural farming. It is not about nano urea. If key challenge is going to be about cropping pattern change and how subsidy policy will change, how procurement system will change, how agronomic practices have to change, and then how markets are. I think this whole set of changes we should talk about. That program, if you having seen closely the Punjab and Haryana situation, what do you think can work there?
No, even in Punjab, there used to be a tradition. First of all, rice was never a Punjab crop, except the Basmati belt. The rest of the belt was not essentially rice. Rightly or wrongly, at that point when Green Revolution was being implemented, because it was already well irrigated, there were rivers, and they could just build some canals, and the whole system. I mean, Punjab and Haryana and Western UP were kind of easily implementable zones for irrigated intensive cropping, both administratively, managerially, geologically, and in every other sense. So the government put all the money there. They gave all the inputs. They gave all the water. They also gave subsidy for fertilizer. They also gave a buyback guarantee. So they in fact stimulated the farmers to produce something that they were not used to producing. They were not used to producing rice. They were asked to produce rice by the government of the day, saying, we will give you all the input subsidy. We will also give you buyback guarantee by in terms of government procurement. So this is the best form of contract farming that a farmer can dream of. So Green Revolution was actually a one kind of contract farming, which incentivized the farmer to change what they were producing to produce what sells. So for him, rice sells, wheat sells, they were producing. Now, if the government says we won't procure rice, wheat, they have to say what else they will procure, because you spoiled their habit. So you have to change their habit yourself, and it is possible. They were producing moong in some parts of moong dal in some parts of Punjab. They produce certain other legumes also. Chole also comes from this part of the world. Chana and many beans are produced. May not be groundnut or sesame; those are not grown there. But some legumes are grown everywhere in the country.
One more question. Do you see the new announcement about PM Pranam, where 50% of the subsidy will be transferred to the state if the state reduces fertilizer use by any means, and will help in terms of reducing the fertilizer use?
I haven't studied it, to be honest, but I think agriculture being a state subject, if states are taken on board with the implementation of the schemes towards sustainability, and if both sides agree on the measures to be taken and the best ways to get the improvement, that would be a welcome step. But whether it has really happened, it has been designed the way it should have been designed or not, people like you might know better. I have not yet examined it. Maybe I should. And if not, we also need to know, do states have any considerations of their own or conditions of their own or alternative routes to sustainability on their own that they can bargain with the center that not this way but this way? Can we actually enrich such kind of conversations and contribute to such kind of conversations? It's a good, I mean, in principle, it's a good thing for any federal relation for something as basic as agriculture. It's anyway a state subject, and state should have a role. Yeah. In Telangana right now, you are facing this problem of excess of rice in a state which was not majorly a rice producing state. And that area that is now being used for rice was earlier used for something else. Maybe groundnut, maybe cotton, maybe some of the other sturdy crops. So part of the problem with the legumes is also that they are very pest prone and pathogen prone. Their shelf life is much limited as compared to rice and wheat. So there are those challenges which need to be handled if you have to realize these sustainability promises. So behind every sustainability promise, there is a implementation challenge.
Right. And
That has to be addressed.
yes, and coming to this fertilizer subsidy issue, the whole controversy around that, the recent Parliamentary Standing Committee report on the budget on the demands, it talks about Ministry of Fertilizer wanted about 3 lakh crores as the fertilizer subsidy going by the current estimation, but center has allocated only about 1.7. If that is the case, then it's nearly half of it. And do you think it will create more crisis, or it will give an opportunity for the people to experiment with alternatives?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, but in an election year, I don't think any ruling party going to elections would want to invite the farmers' wrath on something as sensitive subject as fertilizer subsidy. And yet, it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy because it is a very, what do I say, limited approach, in a very narrow perspective approach to sustainable farming or sustainable agriculture or even sustainable economy or sustainable social justice. Farmers just need a remunerative price for their output, but because the output procurement is very skewed, every farmer is not able to sell to the government. So some degree of input subsidy to the lowest denominator of the farming class is necessary, because if you shift all the input subsidy into output purchase, this is one measure that has been discussed. Let us transfer all the input subsidy into output. Then farmer will save some of that. He will reduce wastage. And people said that if you pay him, 100 rupees for every kilo of fertilizer he is saving, then he will save more. But if you make the fertilizer cheap, he will waste more. But these are arguments which are very superficial, because it only works with those farmers who have that connect with the government. In reality, more than half of the farmers don't have any connect with any government anywhere in the country. They are the ones who will really suffer if you remove input subsidy. So input subsidy cannot be totally stopped in the current economic reality, in the current level of stratification of the Indian society, in the current level of stratification of the land holdings, where 70-80% of the farmers have less than 2 hectares of the land holdings. So that cannot be done. But output subsidy, again, will only reach those people who can bargain for those outputs and have the market connections and political linkages. So one has to be able to walk a very tightrope walk between these two. Completely getting out is only possible if you give them better, means of income and reducing the input costs. So for example, every farmer should have at least one high value crop,
right,
in their entire annual mix.
Right. I will also open up for the participants. Dr. Rao Garu, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, now?
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I have 2-3 questions. Am I audible? Tell me first.
Yeah.
The first thing I want to ask you is, since this whole question is a global one, and then we are we're working on sustainable development goals, the government of India has to come and hold hands with state, and then they should have better center-state relations. And it's high time that we need to make it as a common subject, because the same thing happened in Millennium Development Goals in 1976, when education was made into a common subject. Because when UN asked India, then India replied that it's not our subject, it's a state subject. Then UN said that it's not the right answer. You need to make it. You have a responsibility at the center. As a country, you have a responsibility for increasing, and so that's why the Saksharata mission came and all that. Maybe 50 years hence, maybe by 2026, we may have this to come, because if not in this election year and all that, we hope that by 2026, let it be common subject where the federal center-state relations will come out well, and then the states also will take active part in conducting the work. That's one question. So, will you respond to this, or shall I ask for next question?
I think, sir,
I agree with you. You can go to the next one. I fully agree with you.
Okay. Let me finish my questions. Second thing is talking about incentivizing legume production, or maybe through what's called diversified procurement and all that. We need to understand first why the pulses have gone out of the cropping systems, just because of the nilgai, or maybe the salinization due to urea. Again, nitrogen question comes there, because the Bengal gram, the chickpea has slowly went out of the ground because it cannot sustain salinity, even a small quantity of salinity in the soils. So now, and then not only that, procurement, and then storing pulses is a very difficult thing, because there are so many storage pests, and it's a highly perishable product compared to cereals, all the cereals. So that all these questions have to be handled, so that the end question will be handled through legumes. And the third question I want to, like already mentioned by Dr. Ramu, that farming systems have to be enriched. Like in IRA, we introduced a system where long duration rice wheat cropping system. In fact, the whole of Indo-Gangetic Plains rice wheat cropping systems are there. So they were actually using long duration rice and wheat. So what happened is the intervention was made in the form of going for short duration rice varieties and short duration wheat varieties, and then in between about 100 days has been saved. 100 crop days have been saved, and then in that the mung bean in between, or maybe at the end, or maybe somewhere we need to add a legume crop. So there are several systems available, and then several trials have been conducted by ICR Farmer First, where this is also possible, where legumes have to come again. That's a good suggestion you made. Thank you, sir. These three questions.
I think I mostly agree with all of what you said. So there is nothing much to answer in that sense. But yes, what we really, there are two things which surprise me. With such a very widespread presence of the National Agriculture Research System, right from Delhi to right down to touching almost every district of the country, including soil testing labs and everything. There are two pieces of information which is lacking in public domain. Some of you might know as insiders. One is, what is the national consumption of each of the inputs? At least for me, nitrogen, maybe for somebody phosphorus, because 90% phosphorus is imported, maybe 95%. We don't have phosphorus in our soils. And most of the fertilizer price volatility is because of phosphorus. Till Ukraine war created same volatility on nitrogen. But I'm asking, we don't have crop-wise consumption of fertilizer on a national scale or a state scale. Forget about district scale or taluk scale. This is, I think, a very serious lacuna. We have national consumption of fertilizer because fertilizer industry is organized. They give you gross figures, but you don't have crop-specific consumption data. I don't think it is impossible for agriculture system to collect the data, but somehow it is not happening. It should happen, I believe, because that's a useful input coming from within the system, rather than trusting the industry for whatever it is giving.
Maybe NSS should come into this. National Sample Survey also should come into this and take up this.
So that is one thing we need.
Critical issue
and
now.
That will also tell us, plus we need to intensify the program of pest and pathogen management in pulses. So blaming that for not doing enough for pulses is not going to work, because if we don't need those pulses, things are different. But the fact is we need them. We are importing them.
Yes.
So how is Africa managing its pulses? Can't we at least manage the way Africa manages? Are we so bad in pulse management that we can't even beat Morocco? So
yeah, I think
we should ask ourselves these questions.
Sir, also one of the thing I feel because of the lifestyle changes and all, we are moving towards more protein consumption. So I think it's high time food habits, when the food habits are changing, cropping patterns also have to change. And then accordingly, the food security system, etc., have to change.
Even animal feed production requires protein.
More protein than actually more cereals and
because the animal meat content improves if there is more proteinaceous feed for the animal. If you feed only starch for the animal, it won't give you much meat. But if you feed enough protein to the animal, then only it gives you more meat.
yeah.
So that way also, whether for our food or for animal feed, both ways we need to increase the nitrogen output. To increase the nitrogen output, the best way is to increase legume, either pulses or oil seeds.
Right. So
there are also fodder legumes. In some places, they are using fodder legumes as cover crops. This was also a part of the traditional sustainable farming system, where one season, especially dry season, you don't have much hope on making money out of the farm in that season. So you put a fodder crop and even mulch that crop itself into your and let the cattle on the field mulch whatever remains into the soil. All these practices were happening. So we don't have to do a lot of new rocket science for this.
Yeah, just the whole of the dryland region and Bundelkhand region, it's happening. Water
Absolutely.
crops.
So
the repair has to be done in the intensive regions, not in the suboptimal regions or dryland regions.
in
I mean,
fact,
see how irrigation has suddenly changed the whole landscape of crop production in Telangana.
yes,
Telangana is the agrarian complexity of Telangana is next only to Punjab, Haryana.
now,
In the entire national scale. Within 5 years, it happened.
And
sir,
maybe it must have started with N.T. Ramarao, who gave 2 rupees a rice, 2 rupees kilo rice, and changed the food habits of Telangana people. It started from there, I think.
sir, I
But
think
no, but has production increased at that time? No. Production increased only in the last 5-10 years.
But then rice has become popular in Telangana only because of that. It's okay, sir. I'll move.
yeah.
That has happened everywhere. Yeah, all coarse grains consumption has been replaced with fine grain consumption. Now we are going back to millets and all. That's a part of the problem.
Yeah. I think to summarize the whole discussion, I feel sir,
should I address the a few messages in the chat before you summarize?
Yeah.
Or are there any unanswered questions which can be answered quickly? People have been waiting patiently to hear. So one is about which nitrogen fertilizer is better. So as we said, that should be the last resort. First legume, then manure, compost, and then if you have to add fertilizer, any fertilizer is as good as any other, whether it is neem-coated urea. If the leaf surface area is more, nano urea might also work well. If the leaf is very thin, like a grass blade, the surface available for absorption through the leaf will be less. More fertilizer will fall to the ground than on the leaf. So what is called foliar spray method, which is what nano urea method is, whether you use foliar spray for nano urea or for any other version of urea, it works best for crops with bigger leaves, more surface area. With smaller leaves, there might be more wastage. That should be kept in consideration. Rest, of course, crop performance response trials will tell. So that's as far as that one. Somebody asked which crop contributes to eutrophication. Crops by themselves do not contribute to eutrophication. It is what is not picked up by the crop. The wasteful nutrients that are not harvested by the crop, that is what contributes to eutrophication, either of groundwater or of surface water, not any crop by itself. In fact, people are using phytoremediation of polluted, eutrophicated water bodies by growing other plants on the water bodies floating, which take away all the nutrients, and then you harvest the, like that water hyacinth. Nowadays, water hyacinth is no longer treated as a weed. It is treated as a as a source of biofuel. It is treated as a source of green energy. But water hyacinth only grows in eutrophicated waters. It sucks up all the nutrients from the eutrophicated body. So people are actually thinking of the other way. People are talking of using eutrophicated water bodies for farming while doing phytoremediation. Floating farms.
Yes.
People are
And
coming up with these ideas.
Around Hyderabad, Musi water is used like that. Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, the Hyderabad Municipal Supply Water Board told me that they are supplying treated water to some of the farms. So I said treated water is already removed of a lot of nutrients. What is the point in just giving that water as irrigation? For drinking, yes, you should remove these nutrients and give. But for crops, you should give with nutrients, not after removing nutrients. But of course,
but microbial pollution is
correct. So they have another problem of organic waste. So organic waste removal ke baad, before the inorganic waste removal comes, at that point, if it is possible to make a separate pipeline for only irrigation purposes, that might actually completely remove fertilizer dependence in those areas. Because we are looking at the composition of each of the nutrients in wastewater. In another year, we will tell you those figures. We know that figures in Delhi, they are good enough to remove fertilizer if they are able to reach the farm at a cost which is equivalent or less than urea. Right now, that economics is not working out, even for the places. So what are the plant requirements and application, how to match them? Usually, precision agriculture believes in drip irrigation with fertilizer and water mixed together and giving it in slow quantities like drops or even sprinklers repeatedly, almost daily basis throughout the season. But that is very costly. It may not. It might work for grapes or vineyards or cash crops. It will not work for basic low value crops. So there, people will have to add fertilizer only a few times in a season till they develop more efficient methods for fertigation. There, as I said, if you have enough leftover from last season, you can increase the number of doses. Instead of one dose in the crop, which nobody uses anymore, people give at least 2 doses. If you are able to afford it, if you have a way to do it, you can increase 3 doses. Total urea is the same. If you are using 100, give it 33, 33, 33. If you are using, giving twice, you are giving 50, 50. So that there is no other big. Of course, what stage you should give, it varies from crop to crop. And standard agricultural recommendations from ICR are very good. From that point of view, they have very carefully analyzed at what stage which crop has maximum external fertilizer demand. So at that stage, you have to add. For those things, I think the national agricultural recommendations are the best. Why is nitrous oxide pollution severe in India? Well, unfortunately, the largest source, as I already shown you the data, is unused fertilizer and manure and waste now, including wastewater. Mitigation measures against nitrous oxide and NOx. Technology is available, NOx scrubbers, they are called, to recover NOx as urea. It can even be recycled as nutrient. Technology is available. And when it comes to agriculture, nitrous oxide reduction is, don't add too much fertilizer in one dose. In fact, if you can use other organic sources, because they bind nitrogen better. Inorganic nitrogen has nothing to bind, so it vanishes. That is the fundamental character of inorganic nitrogen fertilizer, whether urea or whether ammonium nitrate or whatever, or ammonium phosphate. It has nothing to bind to the plant or to the soil. It is an independent small particle. It is highly mobile. So either it will become volatilized in the case of nitrogen, not in phosphorus, or it will go into groundwater. It moves. But if it is mixed with humus, like in organic fertilizer or compost or manure, it stays. It becomes organic. So that is the reason it has a longer retention span if it is organic nitrogen, and there is no organic nitrogen fertilizer other than urea right now. CAGR is compounded annual growth rate. We took a decadal value and divided it as how much it would be on a per year basis. Legume will fix nitrogen from atmosphere. Yes. It will lead to nitrous oxide reduction. Yes, to some extent, because the fixed nitrogen by the legume actually is bound to the plant biomass or to the nearby rhizospheric microbes. So it will not vanish as fast as the normal fertilizer will vanish. So it will not be totally free from nitrous oxide, but the emission rates will be very low. So
Right.
among pulses which will fix that particular article by Lada, I can show you the reference if you want, gives exact details of which legume will fix how much. Field Crop Research 2022. That's the reference. I can maybe put it in the chat box. You can note it down from there or save it. That's easier than showing the whole all over again. It will save some time also.
I did. Right.
Okay. What else is there? Yeah. So which crop fixes how much? It has a lot of tables in that article. You can look at it. Whether nano urea compensate normal urea. Even the companies making nano urea are not saying they will completely replace normal urea. Please understand it properly. What they are saying is, in the early growth phase of the crop, when the plant does not have built enough leaf, enough stem surface to absorb, normal urea is required. So first dose is normal urea. It is to replace the second dose that they are giving nano urea. Because by now leaves have grown and you can spray the surface, it can take from the surface. That way soil is saved from acidification, soil is saved from other effects. Even natural nitrogen fixation in the soil gets inhibited when fertilizer is added. This is another problem. As biologists, we all know that the rate of natural biological fixation by microbes in the soil, including even microbes in the nodules of legumes, is much better when there is no externally added fertilizer in the soil. The moment you add externally added fertilizer, these bacteria, they shift to your fertilizer, they don't fix nitrogen. So it is a big mistake to add fertilizer to legume crop. I'm sure our colleagues from ICR system know this very well. And it's also a misconception to think that nano urea will completely replace fertilizer. It won't. Only fully grown plant may take some of its nitrogen through the leaves. Rest of it you have to give in other forms. How much N is actually available for crops in a season if I apply manure, biofertilizer, native soil microbes? Yes, this is a very good question and very precise. These data is made available not for manures, but at least for biofertilizers and native soil microbes in the same reference by Dr. Ladha, which I have already put in the text box. Manure, the major problem with manure is access, affordable access. Farmer is not going to look for manure all over the place. If you supply manure to the farmer at the farm gate, they can replace up to half of the fertilizer with manure. If the manure is fresh and always kept covered. So there are, conditions attached to best manure management. If you bring 1 year old manure left out in the open, it is all gone. Nothing is left in that. It is just carbon. Fresh manure, well-preserved manure, carefully handled manure can replace up to half of your requirement of the fertilizer. though it will vary from crop to crop. And if also have legume in it, definitely half or more. And what will be more acceptable to Punjab and other Green Revolution states? I think they will accept if you give MSP to other crops, they will shift. Just as they shifted to rice for MSP, they will shift to anything for MSP. They are rich farmers. Many of them have big land holdings. They have political nuisance value. And they have a capacity to arm twist the government, any party in power, to get them what they want. You have to give them what they need. After all, they are feeding the country. So, but if you tell them what you are buying, they will produce what you buy. As simple as that. Why can't be a focus on states where rice wheat rotation continue? Exactly. This is the problem of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. Now it is going to be a problem in Telangana also. Thank you very much. That at least answers all the questions in the chat box. I think I have already taken a look at all the questions in the other file that was sent to me.
Yes, sir. Yes.
On the Google Doc.
Yes, yes. All the
I addressed most of them.
Yes.
But if there is something that you remember that has not been addressed, please feel free to ask now before Ramu wants to close the session. It's been quite a lot of.
In the entire Google sheet, whatever questions are there in one form or the other, all the questions are answered, sir. That's why I didn't raise the questions again. And just to conclude, I think it was very, very informative and very, very enriching session in terms of discussion. I feel one of the problem in the country is we take decisions only when we are pushed to wall. And both economically and ecologically, with the fertilizer issue, we are pushed to wall now. That's why we are taking reactionary decisions like pushing nano urea without much field trials, or talking about ZBNF as a solution. So I think instead of getting into a very scientific approach, we are going by either belief or gut feeling kind of thing. I think that's what is the key issue. How do we move towards more informed choices, both at the government level and also keep working with the farmers so that they can also take more informed choices rather than pushed or pulled by subsidies. I think that's the model we need to get into. Unless that kind of system comes in, farmers always will be would be told what is good, what is bad, rather than making them understand for themselves. I think that's what is happening. To summarize from the discussions, I think there is a good requirement today to reduce the fertilizer use. I think particularly nitrogenous fertilizer use we need to reduce. And by increasing your soil organic matter, we can increase the use efficiency of the fertilizer. I think that's no doubt about it. A lot of learnings are there around that. I think that's the most important thing. In that, if you farmers want to move towards organic, natural, regenerative, biodynamic kind of thing, they can have. But overall, as a nation, we need to reduce the fertilizer use. I think that's a top requirement we need to have, both in terms of protecting our own soils, also in terms of moving towards net zero. I think both requires that one. Second, I think there is an urgent need to shift in the cropping patterns. I think the entire effort should be towards that, legume being the major part of the cropping systems. I think we need to move away from rice wheat system, which may call for change in the procurement. It may call change for the research system, more of investments on pulse research also may be important. So I think the whole lot of changes which can lead to cropping pattern change is something which is very, very important. One of my colleagues is working on cropping pattern shifts, why farmers are getting into the current practice of monocultures, and then how policies and subsidy systems influence that. And I think in that context also we were seeing that how policies affect. And I think lastly, as you rightly mentioned, we need to create drivers. That driver should be in terms of incentivizing better practices, better cropping systems, and that will change. So fertilizer subsidies, replacing fertilizer subsidies with more environmental friendly ecosystem services based support systems for farmers may certainly help. I think that's a shift one need to look at. We look forward for PM Pranam. Probably we can come up with more such initiatives in terms of supporting farmers just making a shift without helping farmers and then reducing the fertilizer subsidy will have a big effect on the farmers. I think that's where the challenge lies. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you for all the participants for being with us and then understanding the entire issue. And we hope we can work together in terms of taking this agenda forward, bringing nitrogen question into the centrality of the discussion in the cropping systems and then the crop management system. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we'll share the summary of this entire presentation. We'll write the notes and then we'll be sharing with all the participants. Video will be available on the YouTube. And thank you, sir. Thank you very much once again. And to all the participants, we'll meet again next week. It will be one more interesting session to discuss about another dimension of problem which farmers are facing. And we are carrying out these sessions as a run-up for launching our Academy on Agroecology. We're trying to look at how a science-based approach can be brought into alternatives in agriculture. I think that's what is the core about of Krishna Sudha Academy for Agroecology. We'll be sharing more about this institute with all of you, and we'll be very happy to partner with all of you in terms of bringing knowledge to the people. Unless knowledge converts into action, there is no use of it. Similarly, in India, we are in a situation where theory is preceding the practice. There are some best practices already coming up in the field. How do we build theory behind that? I think that is something which we are trying to look for. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you.